Continuing our description of the scientific model of the Big Five, we will today not only present a personality trait, but also a concept widely used by psychologists, which will be the IQ or intelligence. The reason for this is that openness to experience is divided in two subtraits. The first one is intellect, which refers to the cognitive engagement with abstract information and ideas. It is very present, for example, in scientists or people who are very good at reading, because at the same time these people are associating words, they're also creating schemes in their heads that facilitate their understanding of what they are reading. And another subtrait is just openness, which refers to cognitive engagement with perceptive and sensory information, which can also be called just creativity. A very common trait in artists, painters, musicians, and people who like to represent the world in different ways. The famous thing about putting your emotions into what you do. In the brain, both intelligence and openness to experience are associated with neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the ability of the nervous system and the neurons in your brain to change and adapt in response to changes in the internal environment, with the thoughts, emotions, and decisions you make in your head, or external, with the stimuli you are receiving, with the informations you are feeling sensorially, with the experiences and learning you are having. An example of this is how psychotherapy is able to modify the way your neurons are connected. One of the hypotheses for people to change their way of thinking and reacting to certain situations. So many of the things that we express outside of ourselves are also associated with what it is inside us. More specifically, changing the connections in your brain changes the behaviors you are having in the world. And changing the behaviors or even the world you are around consequently changes the connections in your brain as well, changes your thoughts, changes the way you react to certain things, changes your emotional reaction to them. So cognitive psychologists call this the cognitive triad. This means that the way you are is influenced by your environment and by yourself, and the interaction between these things. For example, the people you live with and the way you interact with these people. The fact is that changing just one of these things tends to change the other as well. For example, if you change yourself, you will eventually change your environment and the people around you. And then if your environment or the people around you changes, this will probably also have an impact in yourself. So things are always systemic and always relating to one another. That's why openness to experience is so important in an individual. People with high openness are much likely to have these changes and are able to adapt to these new situations. They are people who learn faster and who can make connections that few people can make. Despite this, a very interesting thing is that people like this, or more intelligent people, tend to have fewer synapses in their brains, which means that the connections these people's neurons make tend to be much more efficient than those of other brains. Therefore, neuroplasticity is a fundamental property, as it allows the formation of new neuronal connections, strengthens existing connections, and reorganizes neural circuits in response to changes in the environment. It is an incredible ability of our brain. But what happens if you have low openness to experience? Well, it doesn't mean that you are not or will not have all of these things. In fact, it is quite unlikely that a person with low openness to experience will maybe attend this video, since people tend to prefer things that are more routine and familiar and less abstract. So they prefer to see how things work more in practice than in imagination or in abstract conversations. If you could imagine a philosopher who had low openness to experience, for example, We could mention Diogenes, since he was a person who denied many things like status, fame, and even more refined needs because he preferred that which was real, so to speak, more physical and tangible things. These are the people with low openness to experience. And in a way, this is very necessary because let's use a metaphor in a medieval environment, for example. Some cities which had leaders and populations with high openness to experience might tend to open their gates more, allowing other cultures to enter and spread their knowledge and mix everything together. This is a great thing because it greatly increases the variety of things within this society or the city, and it gives it much more growth and so on. On the other hand, opening the gates can also bring other two things. The first is barbarians who will loot and destroy the city, and the other is just diseases and illnesses, which can end up being spread very easily and even destroying the society within the cities as well. However, let's imagine another city which had leaders and a population with low openness to experience, which will hardly open its gates to anyone. They would be much more close within their own culture and could develop it better, avoiding these diseases, avoiding invasions, but at the same time they could lose this variety. They could lose the evolution and the technology becoming outdated in relation to these other cities. So every personality trait, whether low or high, will always have both a benefit and a cost. We don't have a good thing without it bringing us something bad, and we don't have a bad thing without bringing in us good things as well. It's always an exchange, always an alchemical equivalence, so to speak. And if you paid close attention, you'll notice one of the interesting things about openness to experience. Many of our political orientations can indeed be associated with personality traits. In the United States, for example, it was seen that right-wing people, conservatives, tended to present lower levels of openness to experience, corroborating with the idea that these people prefer what has been and what is, because this allows them to continue developing safely what they have already developed. On the other hand, liberals, or people more on the left, presented higher levels of openness to experience. These are people who prefer alternative ideas, who prefer the new over the old, who prefer the different, often just because it is different. And one of the reasons why people with high openness prefer this different one is because in their brains, in addition to neuroplasticity, there are also higher levels of dopamine compared to their counterparts, people with lower openness to experience. So dopamine, which is closely linked to extroversion, also greatly influences openness, but in a different way. While extroversion acts on the dopaminergic system, motivating this person, making them more excited and lively, and people with high openness, dopamine is more associated with the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain linked to planning, to decisions, and to social expression. Normally, in most people, the prefrontal cortex does not have many dopaminergic connections when compared to other regions of the brain. It is possible to imagine that this is a major differential for this trait, since dopamine tends to help in the conditioning and strengthening of neurons, so to speak. And in a conversation between psychologist Jordan Peterson and neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, the two ended up agreeing on a very interesting definition of neurocortical functions. They ended up saying how the prefrontal cortex, or PFC, serves to create potential future selves, since this part is linked to rationalization and trying to predict the future, so to speak. It is more associated as well then with the future, with the long-term goals, and also with imagination, because you are creating or visualizing images that are not present in today's or today's life, but also in the past life. Because you are creating and visualizing things that don't exist yet in the present and neither have existed in the past. It would be the same thought as that philosopher who said, we die in our ideas so that we don't have to die in real life. This means that one of the ways that evolution has found to propagate our species forward is precisely through this mechanism of intelligence and imagination that propagates our own ideas in, of course, then ourselves in the future. While mosquitoes and many other animals need to lay 1,000 eggs for only one small proportion of them to survive due to the great variations and unpredictability of nature and their environment, we, on the other hand, do not need to really die in real life. We die in our thoughts, we die in our ideas, we die in our imaginations, in our works of art, so that we don't need, as this philosopher said, die in real life. Unfortunately, it is not possible to increase our intelligence, and this is largely determined by our genetics. Furthermore, we can divide intelligence into two different groups. One, which is fluid intelligence, and the other, which is crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is your ability to learn new things, plasticity, so to speak, while crystallized intelligence is your ability to accumulate knowledge. But here's a catch. Both fluid and crystallized intelligence increases until our adult life, or more or less until the ages of 25 and 30. But from then on, it declines seriously, and there is not much we can do to prevent this decline. Some aerobic and anaerobic activities can help this by helping us to breathe better, since oxygen is extremely important for our brain functions. But when we look at crystallized intelligence, which accumulates during this time, it continues to increase forever, so to speak, and is closely associated with memory. Therefore, even if you don't have high openness to experience, it is possible to increase your crystallized intelligence by reading books, learning new things, and accumulating this knowledge. And a great way to do this is by organizing yourself and organizing your studies so that you can have a routine that facilitates your learning. However, this ends up being a topic for the next trait, which is on organization or conscientiousness. A very strange word, but I'll see you in a bit.